Welcome again to all of you from this beautiful and very empty World Forum. It's made possible with the amazing staff that you see everywhere, but you can't see. And it's wonderful to welcome you also again for another important session before in the afternoon we are wrapping up the World Circular Economy Forum. The session now is about a very important topic, sparking circular industry innovation. It's organized in collaboration with the World Economic Forum. And I'm Harold, I'm a circular activator, and I'm working also with the UN Global Climate Champions Office. And I love that you get involved in this conversation today, because we need to hear from you, your questions, remarks, and it's also nice if you leave in the chat box where you are dialing in from and what your name is. And please don't forget the Ask the Speaker function. Ask the speaker function in the screen. 2021, a super crucial year for climate change, climate ambition, and we are getting closer to COP26. The climate negotiations are going to happen in November. And the world needs to see there a new vision from the leaders that are coming together, I think with a strong signal that we can make it. And we have to make many changes. And this energy is building up. You can see it daily. We're getting kind of mixed news. On the one hand, amazing lineup of more and more companies and countries saying, we have high ambitions, we're going to make it happen. And then just this morning, another bank pledging trillions of euros for much needed climate investments. And then on the other side, you have unprecedented challenges and change coming socially, economically, environmentally. And just this morning, I want to share with you a note I found particularly touching, that the climate is changing that much at the moment that the polar bears started to mate with grizzly bears. I think it's a very visual example that many things are in flux and changing. And today, we want to focus on the opportunity we have to build and future-proof our cities, to build communities that are resilient and to show pathways on how businesses can change. And this change is happening fast. As a scene setter, please watch that clip. Welcome also to my special guest here in the studio, Vice Minister of the Environment here in the Netherlands, Roald Lapperre. Thank you, Roald. Nice to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. You'll be jumping in and having a conversation, which is really a kind of a dream scenario for me, the business talk also to governments and policymakers, because we want to touch on three important points in this session. We want to cover how politics and policymakers can support to drive the transition to net zero industries. That's the one hand. On the other hand, we want to talk about the importance of circular economy and the role it is playing for heavy industry transitions. And the third one, a favorite one of my topics, is radical collaboration, to really talk about how innovative partnerships are truly necessary and a precondition to make the transition happen. Kicking off with my colleague and friend Antonia Gawel, sitting in Switzerland, and she's with the World Economic Forum. You are one of the hosts of the session, and Antonia, you are in charge of circular economy and innovation at the forum. Why is the topic of heavy industry and circularity so important? What are the challenges and what are the opportunities there?
Great, thank you, Harold, and great to see everybody here today. I think really just picking up on the messages that we saw in the video and what you highlighted, that really achieving net zero decarbonization path is critical. On the circular economy agenda, we've really focused, I think up until now, much more on those fast-moving consumer goods, things like plastic, electronics. Of course, we have been doing that. Yet we know that about a third of global emissions come from hard-to-abate sectors, from those industry sectors, and they're incredibly locked in. What we also know is that to achieve net decarbonization in those sectors, we need the circular economy. The circular economy is a critical lever of change to be able to really decrease the emissions coming from the sector that otherwise production increase significantly. So we really need that decoupling to come in, which is why the circular economy is so critical, and which is why we're really happy to be working with the Netherlands, Japan, and others on this important agenda and launching this session today.
Thanks, Antonia. Maybe a word about the initiative that is also going to be launched today at the forum here at WCEF, particularly focusing on hard-to-abate sectors. Please share the idea behind that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, at the forum, we host an initiative called Mission Possible Partnership. This is really focusing on trying to tackle decarbonization within the hard-to-abate sectors, 8 sectors. And basically what this initiative is all about is how do we really infuse that circular economy lever into that work. So looking at sectors like cement, steel, aluminum, chemicals, linked with the demand sectors, so things like environment, mobility, manufacturing. How do we bring these pieces together to really drive circularity into those industry sector decarbonization plans? It's on the agenda, but we haven't really been able to go deep in terms of what's needed, right? So what are the horizontal, vertical network partnerships we need to surface to really drive that transition? And that's what this initiative is all about, sort of really trying to drive circular economy in order to enable that net zero decarbonization, and very much look forward to here and sharing a little bit more about how to get engaged in making this happen through COP and beyond as well.
Yeah, thanks. And obviously hoping with you that circular steel, circular cement will be much more present in a year from now, when hopefully we can take stock. And Roald, political momentum, that's what we're talking about. And in the Netherlands, the political landscape is changing. We just had elections, but it's an ongoing effort, the circular transition, where policymakers have a very important role to play. What do you think needs to happen, and how policymakers can support this crucial 2050 transition?
Well, I think it's first of all about setting clear goals and then translating ambition into action. And in the Netherlands, as you might know, we've set the goal of full circularity in 2050 and a 50% reduction in use of raw materials in 2030. So that is a goal. At the same time, we've translated this into what we call transition agendas. One of them actually is on the built environment, one of the topics we're discussing today. And then I think it's also about leading by example. Putting the ambition into action means that not just governments, but also private sector should take the initiative and move forward. As a government, we can do so, of course, by regulation, by stimulation, also by government procurement, including circularity in government procurement. But I think it's very important that the private sector takes the lead as well, translate the ambition into action. And we have front runners at the table today in this session. But of course, we need this to become mainstream as well. And that's I think, why we're here.
Yeah, I think in the last years it was very nice how the government has also worked on some very clear lighthouse projects, like on circular textiles, I keep remembering. So I think I want to come back to you in a bit to reflect on what our wonderful virtual panelists are going to say. And so we're turning to them. Industry is an important agent for change. I think that is becoming the story of this year, and that it comes with a burden, it comes with a responsibility. And I just want to repeat why it is so important to look at industry and these 4 sectors we have also here today. It is because 1/3, so more than 30% of global CO2 emissions are coming from this industry. And from within industry, from steel, cement, chemicals, and aluminium. And that's why it's so important that we all engage the industry, that we help it to make the transition from a political point of view, from a financial point of view, as this material production is expected to double in the next decades. Therefore, warm welcome to our virtual international panel. On the one hand, Magali Andersson. Hello, Magali, very nice to meet you. Chief Sustainability Officer and Innovation Officer of the cement and concrete multinational Lafarge. Then Gisbert Rühl, CEO of the steel company Klöckner. Very nice to meet you too. Eva Hinkers, the chair of Europe of the Arup Group, a very big player in the built environment on infrastructure and construction. And Mesbah Zabour, the founder of the Start and Scale Up Circularize here in Holland, that is an innovation company that is working on a circular transition. And I want to take the opportunity first to turn to you, Magali. Welcome to our panel. The tone in your company I have been observing, and obviously it's a very much a company many people looking for when leadership is needed in this heavy sector transition. Your CEO is speaking differently, and he says, as he's turning around the company around digital and inclusive agenda, but also net zero and circular economy. Why is that happening now?
So, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Well, you just heard it, right? In the last 2 minutes, I heard cement mentioned about 5 times. So the building industry clearly has a role to play. If you think about it, rapid urbanization, population rising, we're going to build the equivalent of network city every month in the next 30 years. We have to do it in a sustainable, inclusive and resilient way. And that's why we are becoming a net zero company with ambitious 2030 targets that were validated by Science Based Target Initiative. But as we just said, it's not good enough to have a long-term goal. We need to act now. And the way for us to act now was to launch our Eco-Pact Green Concrete that enables carbon neutral construction. So today it's in 16 markets. It will be in 25 markets by the end of this quarter across all regions of the world and following the strongest certification, because it's not good enough to have a green concrete. It has to be solid and following certification. But let's talk about circularity a little bit. So we are driving the circular economy to build more with less. So today we are the world leader. We recycle 50 million tons of material across our business. And we are now way to 100 million by 2030. The material we recycle, some of them goes as alternative fuel. So we have some sites, for example, in Austria, we already have entirely replaced our fossil fuel with alternative fuel, and that's about 5 million tons of waste that we use that way. But also, we use construction and demolition waste in green buildings. So think about it. You have a green concrete, you make a building, end of life, you demolish that building, you grind back the concrete, make it powder, put it straight back in your cement. How beautiful is that? How circular is that? And we have a cement called Susteno in Switzerland today. It contains 20% of those construction demolition waste. We are piloting some solution with 50%. But you know what? We actually can't go further than piloting because today the regulation does not allow us in Switzerland to pass the 20%. And I don't want to finger point Switzerland because actually Switzerland is the only country in the world that allows the 20%. So I give a little food for thought here. If we could have the entire world enabling cement with construction demolition waste into it, then we could dramatically accelerate our race to net zero. Yeah. Thank you.
Not only we can, we have to, and we will. And that's already, I think, a nice response then, from the policymaker here. But first to Gisbert, to you. Klöckner is one of the largest distributors of steel that is producer independent. I think it's important to say about your company. And you went through a process of digital transformation. You have transformed the company in the last 5 years and also building an open industry platform from a frustration of the lack of transparency and collaboration. And you wanted to, I think, promote circular behavior with that. What was your true experience, positively, but also obviously on the negative side for us all to learn?
Yeah, the problem in traditional industries like steel is, of course, that in the past, companies only collaborated when they had to. For instance, when it came to subsidies or when it came to protective measures against steel imports. Otherwise, each participant was more focused on itself. So also, when it comes to supply chains, the companies or the participants typically started always with themselves. They tried to optimize the supply chain coming from themselves. So they not started with the customer or with the supplier. Everyone wanted to optimize its supply chain. And with this, we only have linear supply chains in our industry. And what we did when we started a couple of years ago with our transformation was the idea that we have to come more to a network in our industry, to a platform which connects in the end all participants. And with this in mind, we developed some materials. Some materials is an open platform, open industry platform which connects all participants in our industry, and as a core also in our ecosystem from scrap, from mining down to the customer. And with this, we of course increasing transparency. Transparency was always a problem, or is still a problem. With no transparency, there is a lot of steel being produced which is not needed. There's a lot of steel shipped around globally by sea, by land, and all this costs enormous resources. And this is what we want to optimize in our industry with a network, with some materials, which is challenging, of course, because these transformations in traditional industries often taking a lot of time to convince the participants that we have to collaborate. I think a good example here is also our blockchain initiative at the World Economic Forum. Here we started to build a chain where we can track CO2 emissions from mining down to the customer. And this also, of course, works only with collaboration, also something which we had to learn here, but which works now better and better. And we have in this consortium, for instance, companies like Glencore, like Tata, so big players.
Thanks, Gisbert, for this elaborations at the beginning and talking about the need for culture change, for collaboration, and also the opportunities of technology. Turning over to the built environment, Eva from Arup joining us. Thank you very much. And I think in our preparation, it struck me what you said, that as a practitioner, you have been observing a trend that in the last 24 months, something that was a promise has now been turned into a real demand on the ground. And I wanted to ask you, what is Arup doing to accelerate this and make sure that there is more and more demand?
Yes, Harold, that's very, very true that we see a much stronger uptake in the industry. And a much higher demand from our clients to better understand circular economy principles and how that can influence their business strategy and their projects. And we see this happening around real estate as well as infrastructure. And to no small part, this is generated by policy. The policy that's happening at EU level, and namely the EU taxonomy, where circular economy is an objective. And then last month, the non-financial disclosure regulation came into force. And again, the two together are to transfer capital flow into sustainable investments. And no one in the industry wants to end up with a stranded asset at the end. So that's a really encouraging development. What do we do to accelerate this? So we have been working with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation over the last 5 years on circular economy recognition in the market, but in the built environment, where we are the knowledge partner for the built environment, and worked on business models for the built environment. And we are currently working with a number of policymakers and international financial institutions, such as the World Bank, the EIB, G20, and some governments, to work on consistent regulatory frameworks. And last but not least, of course, it's working on our projects with clients to develop digital tools that allow us to use data much better and use buildings, for example, as a material bank, so that material gets an identity and can be tracked. Develop on metrics that measure circularity that goes along with the objectives of the policies I talked about earlier.
If I can ask you a question, please, before I turn it to Roald for a policy response. We have seen circular buildings that you were engaged in the UK, for example. And what would be your wish, if you had one, to the policy side? What would most enable much more circular buildings?
I guess the biggest wish would be that for example, in procurement of public projects, not the short-sighted price is prioritized on capex over whole life cycle costing that also includes environmental and social aspects. I think that would be a real step forward.
Thanks so much. Roald, I hear something about red taping, more innovation support. A couple of projects I know myself from my home country in Austria, where there's a lot of potential. The need for cultural change and green public procurement. What are you picking up to give the business side even more hope that they can change faster?
Well, let me first of all say that I've heard quite a few positive things. I think the point Magali made is very important, to translate ambition into action. And then also the example you gave of the 20%, for an example, is something that is probably unintentional, but does hinder scaling up. And this is things we as a government should also be aware of quickly. And that's why I think the interaction between private sector and government is important, because sometimes you find unintentional rules that are a barrier and should be overcome. So I think that one is important. I also like the point Eva made just now on government procurement, that it should not be short-sighted, but it should indeed include the environmental and social aspects as well. And here also I think governments can learn from business practice what is very effective. And let me give one quick example in the Netherlands. In infrastructure, for an example, last year we have commissioned the first fully circular viaduct. So it's basically made of concrete blocks, a bit like Lego, and it can be taken apart and used again. So instead of a 40-year time frame lifetime for that viaduct, it can be used 3 or 4 times, and the material can be used for over a century before it's being grinded and then hopefully used again in another one. So those are elements we should all be learning about and trying to include in our government procurement.
Thanks for the first reaction. I think also public demand, obviously as much important as different buyers clubs that are now we see emerging everywhere around green steel, green cement. I think that's really encouraging. Absolutely need to play that ambition loop between the policy side and the public side and the private side much more. I want to turn to Mesbah. Mesbah, nice to see you also on this panel. A fellow disruptive entrepreneur. We've talked about innovative technology before. I think you're using also blockchain to digitize materials. How are you doing this, and how does it help to fast-track the circular switch that we are seeing?
Thanks, first of all, for having me. It's great being here. To come to your question immediately, like the one thing that is really, really important about blockchain to understand is that it brings something to the world that we have never had before in a digital space, which is digital scarcity and transferring value on a digital infrastructure without any trust needed in humans, which is a great concept if you think about it. And this is exactly what we're using to create a digital twin of a supply chain, essentially. So for every kilogram of material that is manufactured, we create a digital twin on the blockchain that transfers its ownership and its value and is connected to data points such as material passports, etc., at every step of the supply chain. So that allows us to create a digital virtual supply chain that is connected to the actual one. And we're doing this from a protocol perspective, where we see, obviously there's value in bringing this commercially to actual customers, but at the same time, supply chains are so complex that it only makes sense if we have this as a shared language or a standard, if you will. And this is exactly what we're creating. And it started about 5 years ago from the Netherlands as a university project. I wrote a thesis, which one of the main conclusions was that more transparency and information equals more circular economy, to just give it in a nutshell. And that's why we started about 5 years ago. And we're working every day very hard to bring this technology to the industry so everybody can use it to create more transparency from the raw material stage to any other stage in the supply chain and over again.
Thanks. Gisbert was talking before. I want to ask another question, Mesbah, about collaborative platforms. And there's a question coming in from Milou, from a very active audience. Do you think there's actually roles for real business models that are focusing on collaboration and joint value creation, which I think is an interesting one, as often the question is how financially and economically sustainable are such approaches? What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room there, and I think we are just looking at the tip of the iceberg here, because we don't have that infrastructure today. We don't have a digital infrastructure that it really allows companies in a supply chain to talk with each other, make agreements with each other on material and resource flows in a very decentralized and efficient way. We don't have that today. And a lot of the possibilities we don't even have, we can't even imagine, right? So just think about all the things you can do if the whole supply chain was completely digitized and all the agreements can be executed by smart contracts on a blockchain automatically without any human input, and you can do microtransactions everywhere. You can program essentially how a supply chain should look like, who is the owner of which material, who gets paid for what action in the supply chain. And again, we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg. There is so much you can do once you have a digital infrastructure, like let's say like an internet for the supply chain. Like imagine what we do today with the internet. We could not have foreseen this 20 years ago. So the same goes for this.
Thanks. I want to give a question from the audience, from Hendrik to Magali. And would love that you all keep it rather short so we can ask everybody one question from the audience. Magali, is there an actual demand for circular products? Are you seeing this? And what is Lafarge doing itself to create the demand?
It's actually an excellent question. You are right. I think there's a bit of a chicken and egg story here. So what we decided with our Eco Pack, which has a big circular content, and our sustainable cement, is to really say we will go out with our product to create that demand. Because if the demand comes without the product, then it won't work. But if we wait for the demand to exist to deploy our product, it won't work either. But this is where, back to what we were saying, we need governments to play their role, because if you think of all the infrastructure projects driven by government coming out of this pandemic that are happening, if we could have those as a condition, the sustainability part, the circularity part of the product, part of those investment that have been committed by the government, that would be fantastic help. Was that short enough?
That was good. A shout out to governments and what their business partners can do. And I want to keep it with the collaboration, as it's also the name of the game today. Gisbert, you talked about the collaborative platform, which is good. But what is your company actually contributing in this to enhance collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, we developed, at least for our industry, this platform. So we started in 2014 with our digital transformation, and the outcome was not only the transformation of Klöckner itself, the outcome was also this platform, which we now want to make more independent from Klöckner. So that this platform is really independent in the end. And participants have then the possibility to do more or less all transactions within our industry through this platform. A precondition is, of course, that the industry is digitalizing more and more, and this is I think the hard thing in our industry, that traditional companies, and especially also a lot of smaller and mid-sized companies, are not very far in digitalizing their business. And but going forward, I think this is the only way, because we are also in only part of a much bigger supply chain. And when we don't digitalize our supply chain in between, then we will have issues here.
I think you make an interesting point around transparency and trust that is needed. And you're talking, I think, of building also a venture that maybe is something outside of your own company. And Antonia, I want to give it back to here, because obviously the topic of trust is something very crucial in this transition and something what the forum is engaged very much in. What does the trust mean in your collaborative efforts around the Mission Possible platform? Somebody is asking here from the audience.
I mean, absolutely. I think perhaps, trust is obviously a critical foundation to any form of partnership, right? So a lot of the industry collaborations that are shaped, they're pre-competitive. So it means that industry players need to be willing to come together against a shared objective. So in this net zero decarbonization, and then trust one another to collaborate across that industry to be able to come up with solutions that can only be achieved if that collaboration is in place, and exactly trust that foundation. I think it's also important to say that it's more than just trust. We, of course, then need the principles for collaboration and clear agreement around how those collaborations will take place as well, to be able to progress and innovate as well. So I think the simple answer is we need trust across industry, but also along the value chain, and equally with government, as we've just heard, to have these sometimes challenging discussions around the necessary conditions to scale solutions as well, going both ways. So that's a critical foundation, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. And I think at the moment I want to leave the questions from the audience and turn it back again here to our wonderful panel. Eva, back to you, discussing a bit about business models. And I think they are very important to make that transition sustainable and long-lasting. What are your lessons learned from the circular building pilots that you have seen in terms of finding sustainable business models for these solutions?
Yeah, well, maybe before I talk about new business models, one really straightforward business model is, of course, to make best use of what we have already. So make best use of existing buildings, make sure that buildings are adaptable, flexible, so that they can be used over a long period of time. A business model I would like to highlight in the context of circular economy is product as a service, which is really gaining momentum and is providing new revenue streams for manufacturers. With product as a service, the product remains in the ownership of the manufacturer. And you, I'll give you a very simple example. An office carpet, you lease the carpet, you don't own it. And after you've used it, you give it back to the manufacturer. It's being remanufactured and then turned into a new carpet and to the next user. And that is a business model that is really gaining momentum. Carpet is one example, light is another example, facades is a good example where we see that happening. So they really transition the industry and decouple consumption from economic growth.
Thanks. Magali, over to you for a second. Lafarge has very clear circular economy goals. I was reading about 100 megatons of cement in the next years to be reinserted into the production process. What barriers are you seeing? I'd love them to Roald. Maybe you have a go at this response.
No, I think today we are ready, as I said earlier, we are ready and we have carbon neutral construction. However, we really need the government to set the right incentive and regulatory framework to scale it up. We talk about build back better, and that's for us. We are in an unprecedented time of investment in infrastructure with stimulus package coming out of the COVID crisis. So the President Biden that was announced, the plan that was announced just a few days ago, it aims to modernize aging infrastructure and making it more sustainable, but also creating jobs. So it's a complete win-win. So I think it's really time to act now. We can't miss that opportunity. So what we need industry and policymakers working together. I give you an example. In region where carbon pricing exists, our business really, the business case rely on the level playing field with importers. So we need to that protection so we can push our efforts. We need collaboration across the construction sector, and we talked about the full construction value chain, but we don't have today sustainability performance that align all the criteria, not just the construction one, but also the living of the building. So the full life cycle of the building from construction to the end of its life. And of course, we need it across the industry. And I just want to mention quickly here, carbon capture. Carbon capture development of infrastructure will be absolutely key for net zero. And no single industry or company can achieve it by itself. We need to be together to make it happen.
Yeah, Magali, thanks for mentioning that. I'm picking up a couple of things, but Roald, maybe some responses. CCUS might be an interesting one also to respond to, but in terms of policy responses to what the need is.
Well, again, thank you for the suggestions done, because I think there are quite a few very valuable ones in there. I actually thought that the point that was made by Mesbah on digitalizing product supply chains is one that is still resonating with me, because I think that one we should give more thinking also from the government perspective, and that's actually why I think it's so important to be here to hear such ideas and suggestions. On the point Magali just made, here also I agree with you that regulatory efforts are important. So is demand. Demand is a very big pull factor, of course. And here we have more experience in some consumer goods sectors than in these hard-to-abate sectors. And maybe that's why they're hard to abate. So I think we need to learn from what we've done with plastics, with textiles, with electronics, to see how we can translate that also in effective government action when it comes to the sectors we're talking about today, because that can, of course, help very much.
Yeah. And thanks. Obviously, this is also the reason why this initiative is being launched around hard-to-abate sectors and circular economy. So a lot to do for Antonia, you and your partners. That's going to be fantastic. Gisbert, before we close the round, we have been hearing you have transformed your company. Green steel is becoming, like green cement, a topic of this year where a lot of hope is in. What is holding us back still to move faster on circular steel, on green steel, and how can we break through these barriers? Your experience, please.
Yeah, green steel is a big topic, of course, and goes in the right direction, but we also have to face the reality. It will take decades until we have enough green hydrogen also to produce green steel. So this is neither a short nor a midterm solution. On the other hand, steel is 100% recyclable, but only 30% of the steel which is being produced comes from recycled steel. So we have to increase here the share of recycled steel, but for this also we need these platforms. We need these platform business models to make sure that scrap is collected everywhere and that the scrap finds its way to the steel producers. And with this, we not only increase the share of recycled steel, we will also be able, again, through this platform, to reduce transports and with this also enormous emission of CO2 within the supply chain. It doesn't come. It's not. Everything is not coming from this emissions from the production. A lot of emissions coming also from the supply chain itself, and there is a much quicker fix than to wait for green steel.
You know, but it goes without saying that we need both. And when you talk about decades, it makes me slightly nervous because we don't have decades to wait. To be honest, I want to play it back one time to you. Is it a technological question? Is it a policy question, or is it a finance question, or one of collaboration that we need to build a place where this kind of advances are made much faster? Because we don't have decades, to be very honest.
To whom was this question?
I said to you, is it a technological question, a policy question, or a matter of finance that we need to break through? That
we need the technology to produce steel out of hydrogen, and then we need the hydrogen. And we need green hydrogen, because with gray hydrogen, we cannot, in my point of view, not produce green steel. So, and producing all this hydrogen is a big issue. And to solve both the technological challenge to produce steel out of hydrogen and to produce the green hydrogen itself, that will take decades. We have to face it. This is not something which we can implement in our industry in the next 10 years. And this is why I'm saying we need also other solutions than only focusing on green steel. We have to focus also on the supply chain itself, and we have to make sure that more steel comes from recycled steel, in my point of view.
Can I jump in quickly?
Please.
Because I think the point, Gisbert, you're making is important, but I would also like to link it with the point that was made earlier on green recovery. What we see right now is that quite a number of EU member states are using also the recovery and resilience funds the European Commission has available to invest indeed in green hydrogen. So here I think we can try to increase the speed of that transition to ensure that it doesn't have to last decades. We must be realistic, of course, but here I think also we can try to combine efforts.
We absolutely have to combine efforts. I totally agree with you. I want to ask a question from the audience, from Naomi to Magali. It's an interesting one. How do we ensure that collaborations are not emphasizing the needs of incumbents more than of disruptors? How are you balancing this in a I guess, very traditional sector where disruption innovation is happening a lot? And I think you have a big innovation center yourself. How are you dealing with that? And also maybe with a view of the emerging economies vis-a-vis what we're seeing in more established economies. Interesting to hear your thoughts.
It's a very interesting question, and I don't know if you noticed, but I am in charge of both sustainability and innovation, and that's where we place innovation in Lapperre. We think that we need to combine both, because I think everyone wants to become the big disruptor. Everyone wants to find the magic things that are going to, in one product, decarbonize the entire industry. We obviously work a lot of this, like you just said. More than 50% of our R&D research is on sustainability, low carbon products. 40% of our IP is on that. But I think what you have to think about, though, is what do we do today and the scalability. You can find this super magic product, but if you're not able to scale it up to the needs, to the famous New York City that we have to build monthly, then it's going to work in the long term, but in the short term, we need to use our eco-pact and all the products we have while we work on the mid-term and long term, and hopefully one day find this super disruptive product that we are all wishing for.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Obviously, handing over to the innovator, Mespa, anything that you want to contribute here? How easy is it, the innovator, to truly move also the big players in markets that you're engaging in?
I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do is bring this infrastructure to communicate information about supply chains and digitize the whole supply chain. And obviously, supply chains are extremely complex. And if you go to any given brand, if it's the electronics or built environment, everything, chances are they source from many, many different industries. And the same goes if you go to a big supplier, they apply to many, many different applications and verticals. And because of this fact, it's very, very complicated for a startup to gain enough traction, because either you get to a winner-takes-it-all approach, where there is one company or two companies that are doing essentially everything, or we have to go back to the roots of where we came from in the internet era, which was open standards. And this is something we are pushing for very, very hard, to create a digital infrastructure for circular economy in an open standard, very similar to previous standards that we all use every day but we forgot about, which is IMAP for email, for example. Why is it that there is no one company that rules email? Because there is an open standard. There's an open internet standard that is non-profit, non-proprietary, and it doesn't matter if you use Gmail or Outlook or if you build your own email client. you don't care if your customer uses Gmail. And this is something we should pursue in the circular space as well, to have a digital shared language for open communication about circular economy that is independent of any commercial solution.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think they have some efforts upcoming on standardization. I like that idea a lot. If I want to bring you in here, interesting question from Lu Ying from the audience. Most circular conversation, this person says, are still felt as very ideological and led by the developed world or the West. How can we involve, and I thought it's interesting in the industry, how can we involve more upstream stakeholders that are often also used in emerging economies without the same ideological interest on environmental sustainability? Any experiences from your global work there?
Yeah, well, actually, we see the opposite. We see Africa, for example, leading in some of what we just heard of reusing of material in buildings and in infrastructure. We don't all have the sophisticated digital tools that we just heard about, and I 100% agree with the open source approach. That there are communities that are very, very sophisticated around reusing the material in their communities. So I would disagree with that statement, actually.
It's nice to also hear on this panel's disagreement. I very much appreciate it. Thank you very much. Because I think that's a part of the open conversation we need to have. And Antonia, I want to hand it over to you because we are now nearly ending our panel. And you have here very eloquently laid out, I think, what's happening, but also what's needed more of from, I think, your hard facts, but also the soft topics around culture that we discussed. What is the forum doing now? 6 months towards COP are left, so time is truly running. And what do you see as the next important step on this industry and circular economy agenda, which is becoming a very important topic of this year?
Great, thanks, Harold, and also thanks to the panelists, because this conversation is exactly the type of debate that we need to be having. Maybe let me just highlight a couple points. Maybe one to the last comment. Absolutely, this transition needs to be global, and I'm at least pleased to say that actually just yesterday we hosted the annual Africa Circular Economy Alliance meeting, hosted ministers from Rwanda, South Africa, and launched the 5 bets for circular economy across Africa. So there is truly global movement, including across ASEAN, Latin America. So we are seeing this transition truly disseminating around the world, and that has been a real core and central focus for our work. And that plays in, of course, also to this discussion in terms of industry transition. Equally, that needs to be global as well. And I think maybe just the 2 threads really that we've tried to drive into this work. One is that, and I think, Harold, this picks up on your point, we can't sit and point fingers at one another as to who needs to move first or take action, because we don't have time, right? We need to drive industry collaboration. So there's incredible innovation capacity, which we've heard about in terms of how industries can transform through digital transformation, the 4th industrial revolution. There's new technologies and solutions emerging all the time that can really disrupt this current linear system. There's also sort of horizontal and networked collaborations that we're seeing where really nascent probably ideas of how traditional industries are starting to collaborate outside of their perhaps linear approach to collaboration. And that's what some of this industry collaboration work is starting to surface. It's no longer just about a steel company being a steel company, fertilizer being a company being a fertilizer company. As they look to circular economy solutions, as they look to decarbonization solutions, I would venture to bet that in 10 years, none of these sectors will traditionally stay in the same sector. Because I think to the point about you need hydrogen, you start to diversify your portfolio as industry. So it's these partnerships, these industry partnerships that we're really focusing on in this work. As you mentioned, looking at steel, aluminum, chemical, cement meets their demand sectors as well. So we need to surface these partnerships, point one, understand where these innovations are coming from, right, within industry, leadership across them from within industry. But we also know, as we've been discussing, and Roald mentioned this, as well as some others on the panel, that there are still necessary collaborations between industry and government to overcome, in some cases, barriers that might be regulatory, incentive, market-based in nature, where you do need policymakers to step in to be able to shift that status quo. But nobody needs to sit and look at one another for who's going to act first. We need to drive this really quickly. So I think just to mention, we are launching a site today, a microsite in collaboration with the Netherlands, but also McKinsey's been involved as a knowledge partner to lay out some of these opportunities, the kinds of partnerships we need to see, the kinds of policy enablers that we need to see. And what we hope to do is to drive engagement from many of you and more in this effort through to COP and beyond, to be able to not kind of have a conversation, but drive proofs of concept and drive examples of where this is working and examples of what we need to do to scale between business and government, because we need to do this quickly, is perhaps the final point. So I think we'll show the site where you can go to find out more, but I think really it's a call to action and a call to engagement, because we have some solutions, but we need more activation here.
Yeah, I got a little glimpse into this microsite. Please check it out. I think it's also on the site, www.ceclimate.webforum.org. You see it now. It's going to be a nice repository. And the question, please, obviously from all of us, is engage there. Try to find collaborative partners and see how you can get involved to be part of this amazing transition. In a year, we're going to ramp up our work on industry and circular economy transition. Roald, the Holland and you personally, your minister, are great champions of this transition. It's not always easy to be a champion because it comes with commitments and expectations. What is the commitment of the Netherlands to play a role in this project and obviously also be an inspirer for more action?
Well, I think we should be strong on ambition. We should be clear that this is not a nice to have, but a need to have, but open-minded on how to reach our goals. Together with the World Economic Forum, the Netherlands will continue to work to identify barriers and to find solutions to overcome those barriers. I think that is a commitment we'd be happy to make here. Of course, the World Economic Forum has great convening power through this conference, and at other moments we would like to add our own weight to that, of course, and invite other governments, private sector actors to join. And Antonia rightly said that we're looking also to Latin America, Africa, and Asia to broaden this globally. Let's scale it up in the run-up to the World Economic Forum's annual meeting, in the run-up to COP26. Use those moments to step up ambition and not just retain the momentum we've built, I think, here today and yesterday, but really bring it further. I think that will be our commitment and our ambition.
No, thank you very much also for the reminder of the neediness to be an open mind to the transition, because not all solutions are there yet. And you're pointing there are definitely other leaders like Chile we have heard earlier in this wonderful conference, or Uganda and the African Circular Economy Network that are driving this now also much more structurally globally. And back to our wonderful panelists that have been also very patient with us. Thank you for giving your time and thanks for all your commitments. I would like to go maybe with 1 minute for each to ask you about what your commitment is personally and or as organization to scaling up and increasing the speed of the transition, truly, but also how we can support you. How can the community of public and private actors be supportive in that? Let's go, please, Eva, please start that final round.
Well, personally, I will continue to invest a lot of my time and energy in this because I truly believe that this is absolutely the way to go. As a firm, we have committed to net zero by 2030, and circular economy is part of that strategy and roadmap to get to that. As a company, we'll also continue to invest in R&D to advance circular economy further. And we will continue to widen our network and collaboration partners. And to that end, it was hugely interesting to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks for the kind invitation. Gisbert, How many years do we have?
we want to
It's a
make a
joke.
further contribution,
Personal
of course, to
commitment, corporate
reducing
commitment,
CO2.
and how this community can help you, because I believe it's really a community of support that is necessary.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, we, of course, want to make a further contribution to reducing CO2 in the steel supply chain, driving forward the circular economy, especially through the development of collaborative platforms and blockchains. We clearly see no contradiction here between efficiency and sustainability. Hence, the contrary is true in our experience, because everyone will benefit. Therefore, we will, with full conviction, I have to say, sign up this very valuable circular economy initiative.
Thank you very much for that commitment and truly for your leadership too. Magali, please, what's a personal commitment, Lapperre's commitment, and how can you be supported on the journey?
So personal commitment, innovation was just added to my portfolio, and I am committed to make sustainability plus innovation to be a 1 + 1 equal at least 4 or 5. So that's going to be extremely exciting. Now, I think we are in a once in a generation opportunity here to make a change, to become more circular. Everything is aligned. So it would be criminal not to do it. So I think we need to partner together, industries, government, and make this happen. So I'm ready. Lapperre team is ready. So let's do it. Let's build a more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive world together.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you for the strong statement. Also saying criminal not to do it. Stars are aligning. I truly believed it too. Also, what I keep repeating, we have to define mathematics. 1 + 1 is 4. Love that. Our kids will love to hear this too. Our innovator, Mesbah, what are you saying as your commitment, your company's commitment, and how we can support you?
I kind of touched upon it already. One of the core beliefs is that we need to do this in an open fashion, in an open protocol, and this is exactly also our commitment. So even though we're a for-profit commercial company, we want to push this solution from a perspective of an open, non-proprietary protocol. And one of our main first steps that we take into this is to actually launch, together with a host of our commercial partners that we work with, an alliance that is going to push this forward. So my ask would be, if there is anybody who would like to pursue a similar approach where we create this digital infrastructure for the circular economy in a very open fashion without creating the next Facebook, please contact us and see how we can move this forward in a non-profit alliance.
Thank you very much. I think they get trust coming back here. Turn one more time to you, Roald. You have shown so much commitment in the last years here, carrying the circular economy flame also and make it more shiny, even lighter. When you reflect a bit back and forward as a person seeing Holland emerge as a front runner, what's your wish for this year? What's your big thing you want to achieve?
Well, I liked what Magali said. It would be almost criminal not to do it, but it's also very rewarding to do it. That's the way I feel it's been developing in the Netherlands. It is rewarding, but it's also necessary. And I think the message that is resonating is that it is necessary to prevent catastrophic climate change, to prevent biodiversity loss, to prevent pollution. So there are very good reasons to do this. And I think the reward will be there for all of us. So yeah, well, my ambition, my personal ambition is there. My government will be there, and I hope we'll be there all together.
And see each other to check in when we have the World Circular Economy Forum in the fall with Canada. Antonia, for you as a host, co-host, how can companies get much more engaged with the agendas of the forum?
I mean, it's quite simple. Really, you can go to the site that was mentioned and certainly reach out and commit. And I think just to say that, I'm leaving this discussion particularly inspired, right? I think it's easy for us to kind of become challenged by timelines that we have, but when we hear some of the technology innovations, the commitments that we have from governments and corporates to happen, shows us what's possible. And what we need to do is engage many more people in this agenda, many more companies from these sectors, many more innovators who have the solutions to actually translate this energy and ambition into real implementation that is down that emissions curve through these solutions. So I think really simply, if you're interested, go to the site, contact the team and get involved because we are working on quite a sprint through to the COP, focusing in on these sectors, working on things like the built environment. The World Economic Forum partners vastly with all of the organizations working in this space because we can only do this if we come together and raise ambition, raise attention to these agendas, and that's hopefully what we can achieve over the next few months with you all together. So big thanks, Harold, Roald, and all the panels as well on behalf of the forum for your engagement today, but also commitment to moving this agenda forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Mesbah, Gisbert, Eva, Roald here in Magali. Thanks to all of you for being part of this journey in a tremendously interesting topic. It's going to be an eventful year, but hopefully we see a lot of circular industry action. And we look forward to hearing and reading from you. Please stay engaged because there's one thing clear. Please act. Thank you very much.